People often ask the question, why does God allow war? You know, the Apostle James asked that very question when he wrote in James chapter 4, where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desire for pleasure that war in your members? You lust and you do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. You know, people create war because they choose to sin rather than obey God. In fact, most of the evil that is in our world today is a direct result of men and women using their free will to do that which is sinful instead of obeying God's standards. It has been wisely said that the most extraordinary thing about human beings is the fact that they pursue ends which they know to be disastrous and turn their backs on ways which they know to be joyous. How true that is. Do you realize that God can take the evil of this world and the tragedies of life, and He can use them for good and for His eternal glory? In fact, God never wastes your pain. In other words, God can take the most evil and tragic situation, and He can work in it and through it. Paul shared that idea when he spoke these familiar words in Romans 8 and verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and those who are called according to His purpose. God works in all things. And all things here refers to things both good and bad. You see, God has the ability to use difficult situations in a wonderful way. In fact, God oftentimes uses sickness and suffering to bring people to Himself. Do you remember in John chapter 5? Jesus healed that paralytic man at the pool of Bethsaida. He said afterwards, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." You see, his sickness and suffering was the result of his personal sin. But you see, that very sickness brought this man to Jesus. And in the same way, many people come to Christ because of an unexpected sickness, a tragedy, the death of a loved one, or through some personal crisis. Sometimes God uses tragedy to get our attention and bring us back to Him. It was C.S. Lewis who said, God whispers to us in our pleasures, but He shouts to us in our pain. You see, when someone is deliberately rebelling against God and they get ill, or they are terminated from their job, when someone is lying, when someone who lies gets found out, or when someone who is going astray and they get arrested for drunk driving, you know, maybe God is trying to get their attention. And maybe God is using that to bring them back to Himself. That's why the psalmist said in Psalm 119 and verse 67, "Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word." And friends, there's power in the word. There's understanding and comfort when we get to know the God who loves us. And my prayer is that the Spirit of God would take the word of God and bless you with it today.